Welcome back to Simply Trade Tips. I'm Renee Chiuchiarelli. I'm here with Julie Parks, Hammer and Heels.
Oh,
We're going to give you a call to action or FIO, figure it out. Um, I think today we're starting a new series. Believe it or not, we're on series 6. And actually, the number 6, if you take my trainings, is very always running theme through customs regulations. So this is going
uh,
to be a good one, Jewel.
ooh.
So what are we talking about today on our series 6, episode 1?
So series 6, I think you covered, or maybe not, that we're going to discuss org structures in the whole series and kind of where customs fits. And I think really in this episode, we'll spend some time talking about how org structures like are in a company, what types of org structures. So we need to define that and set the foundation. So let's go ahead and set the foundation in this episode.
All right, so the first episode, we're going to lay the groundwork, walk through the most common org structures,
Mm,
how companies typically place customs within them, and what works and what doesn't, depending on the model. So we're going to do an overarching view, I think, of org structures. I love this because Julie and I've worked in multiple different org structures,
uh-huh.
and I have my favorite. She has her favorite. So we'll get
Mhm.
into it.
But I will start by saying that, right? It doesn't matter what org structure you're in. It's just a matter of time and money. Okay. So keep that in mind. It's just a matter of maybe you need more resources, maybe you need more automation, maybe you need, right? So we can work in any of these structures. But what we're going to do is help you identify some of the gaps that exist as this series moves on. But today, again, we're just focused on, and maybe we can start with like why the structure matters for customs. So customs isn't one of those. Customs is definitely a function that sits in the middle of everything, right? So we're in procurement, finance, logistics, legal, tax. And then on the export side, if you're talking about goods movement that way, you're talking about the sales side and contracts and things like that. So the 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 problem is that often customs doesn't own everything outright in the org chart, right? You have to assign tasks.
Yeah, and when customs isn't clearly positioned,
Mhm.
there can be definitely compliance gaps. We're gonna
Right.
review some of those. Yes.
Right. So I think like org structure dictates who owns the decisions, who escalates the risks, who funds compliance, money, she'll follow the money trail, right? So customs doesn't ever fail because people don't care. I've never found a case where there have been like bad people trying to take advantage of the situation, right? I've been lucky actually that way. And I'm sorry if you have listeners out there, but we find that it's failing because it's structurally misaligned.
Yeah, and there's also examples where the customs team may only be focused on operations or on
Mhm.
compliance, not both, and that can cause some issues. So, common org structures. Let's start with the most common functional org structure, which we are referring to as the centralized structure.
Mhm.
Think supply chain, contract, sales, finance, legal. Each has its own lane. I wish we had a visual, like an org
Mhm.
chart we can put up. And each has its own VP.
Mhm. So in this model, customs can generally sit in supply chain or legal, sometimes under a group called trade compliance itself, if you're lucky, but it's usually buried a few layers down.
The upside of this is clear ownership, and usually the customs leader has their own budget. That's what I
Mm,
like.
I know, right? And the downside, well, it does change based on which function customs sits beneath. So if customs is in supply chain, it could become too execution focused. For example, filing the entry, moving the freight, being accountability for velocity, and cost, right? If compliance reports to legal, it could become too compliance focused. For example, it's empowered to challenge some upstream decisions like supplier selection, valuation models and origin claims, kind of wedging yourself into kind of the business decisions a bit too much. And perhaps they might perceive it a bit too downstream, right? So the
Right.
downside is also if the customs leader doesn't have their own budget, as Renee mentions, or only has a fraction of the budget because you're constantly playing between a bunch of different resources. But if we found that if you're a leader and have your own budget, you have the ability to mix and plug and play like this year. I'm going to work on this thing, and it becomes a little bit more of a cohesive strategy. Whereas if
Yeah,
you
and
don't, you end up asking your budget holder based on what their priorities are, and you might never get your whole shoot and match complete.
yeah, and like our last series on tech, you might be able just to go out and buy some tech,
Yeah.
more or less. Okay, so our next one is decentralized. This is the divisional structure by product line, region, or business unit.
Right. So here, customs often becomes decentralized, meaning each division handles its own trade activity and requires things like a corporate structure or a council to keep things standard and improving.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you run the risk of in a decentral uh, entity one or business one is doing something a little different than business two.
Yeah, and one of my former companies, I was the corporate import compliance manager, and we had 80 companies, and we had this structure.
Mhm.
And, it's a lot by influence. It's a little like Julie said in the beginning, there's ways to, be strategic and move forward in each structure, but each one can be a little has its own challenges. I found this structure a little challenging, but as an employee, that can either be comfortable or uncomfortable, because you can feel efficient, change happens quickly, and you might have a direct voice, up in the company or the region that you're at, right?
Yeah. So
So you can
I
make
do agree, and it's uncomfortable, if you are a leader in the organization because you realize you have many different decision makers for the same product, right? So it takes a lot to kludge things together, if you're the leader. But like Renee mentions, if you're in like a business unit, it feels very quick and efficient. And if you talk to somebody and they want it done, they will give you the money. Like the funding is even more flat too, even if you're not the budget holder here.
yeah, true. All right. Next, we have the matrix structure, hybrid, both central or
Mhm.
decentral. Now, this is a very complex structure. Julie and I know this structure.
Oh, yeah. So
Everyone's favorite or least favorite.
yeah. So in the matrix, customs reports, if customs reports to supply chain, it will have a dotted line, generally accountability wise to legal or tax or finance, kind of that separation of I call it church and state, the compliance and the operations. If customs does report to legal, it may have a dotted accountability line to supply chain or sales, right? Because you don't want to be too, you know, to stop the material, right? So there needs to be kind of that joint accountability, but we do find more that the ops sit in supply chain and then dotted line to legal, tax, or finance.
So the reality of being a leader in the matrix is you have several bosses. That's the crazy part. Usually one for standard performance, another one for work. Maybe you're on a couple other teams for projects, and decisions are made by consensus on a team. It's amazing.
Incentive. And I will say too, if you have ever run in this structure, you can be a part of Congress after this because you really do need to consensus build. There's all that soft skills that you need to do to run an organization in this space. But um, if and it's a big if, right? If there's a clear decision authority, it tends to be who holds the budget for the capital projects and always legal for compliance concerns. So here we find customs professionals end up stuck a little bit between the speed and the compliance constantly, like are constantly being pulled into a couple different directions. And what projects are you going to do and who funds them? Because the compliance matters generally to legal department, the speed matters to the business, and how do you get projects authorized, because even if you're in compliance you still need the business to implement. So essentially, you're constantly try as Renee mentions, like many different bosses, your performance and development, if it points to supply chain, you're probably going to lean more toward what the supply chain org wants and less toward your dotted line report, because if they're not savvy about influencing your performance and development routine, and you don't have that locked in, you quickly realize who writes your paycheck and who writes your performances, and you'll lean in that direction too much. Mhm.
Right. That's true. So let's talk about where customs should sit. The big distinction we see in mature organizations and customs compliance versus customs operations.
Right. And this is critical because ops is about execution, it's the entries, it's ACE filings, it's broker management, daily problem solving.
Yep, and compliance is about governance, classification decisions, valuation methodology, origin policy,
Yep.
audit, and risk tolerance. So it's a more strategic
Mhm.
process.
Right. It's a good thought for organizations to separate these roles structurally. I'm a big proponent of it, even if the team is small, because the focus and time becomes devoted to the task, right? So if you're gonna focus on operations, you're gonna focus on compliance, focus on, and then you meet in the middle with regard to kind of joint activities.
Yeah, you have to have a crossover because operations is finding errors that compliance needs so that they
Mhm,
can change the policy, change the strategy. So it's super
mhm.
important if they are separated that they cross over routinely, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but success completely depends on these two subgroups to align, like we're saying,
Mhm.
and cross function,
I've
cross
witnessed it
functional
where they
communication.
don't. I've witnessed it where
So
they
the
don't.
real world,
Bad.
what's that?
I've witnessed it where they don't
Yeah.
align and it's not as eloquent and there's constant and you constantly don't know you want to do the right thing, but does your boss want this project done because it was someone else's idea that's their, I don't know, compliance lead. It's very tedious if it doesn't work. So when the teams don't align, I have been in organizations where this creates a bunch of contention. And as a compliance professional, you like to have smooth operations and a compliant organization, but if you report to one and not the other, and they're not enjoyable colleagues, sometimes you're only forced to work on what the one wants you to work on. So,
Yeah, right. Or otherwise, what I say, muy malo. So let's talk about the
yes.
real world. Let's call out a few red
Mhm.
flags we see all the time.
Okay, so one, I think customs buried underneath logistics, or I was buried under contracts at one point in time and figured out contracts was sales and went, oh my word, never shall a compliance function be in a contracts to sales organization. And then what we see is that it might be okay that you're embedded there, but if you don't have a phone a friend, an escalation path, it creates conflict of interest between broad companies' goals. It misses customs risk reporting and it sub-optimizes the strategic nature of the customs function.
Awesome. Number two, the compliance responsibility is put on the broker. That's a red flag for us.
Mhm. Right. Brokers file entries, y'all. They do not own your risk.
Third is no executive sponsor. This is significant. You need someone in the organization that understands the role of customs operations and customs compliance.
And we'll spend more time in a later episode talking about what an executive sponsor is and what it is not. It is not a cheerleader, okay? It is an actual person that helps, carve out problems for you and help clear the roadblocks. But if customs can't influence procurement or finance or sourcing, it's not a compliance function. It's a paperwork function.
Yes. And number four, customs compliance and ops is not the budget holder. Woohoo! We talked about that. So that's a red flag for us
Right.
if
And it's
customs
key,
is not the
yeah,
budget holder.
key and critical. Yeah, it's key and critical in with any of the structures.
Yes. So today was about the foundation. We talked about the three different types of structures. We wanted you to understand what they are in general, and then Jewel.
Right, and then in the next episodes, we'll talk about how to make it work or change it, how to modernize it with some tweaks or with full reorgs. I've been in both.
And we know that, there's problems in all types of orgs. You're not alone. We're going to help you with the best way to, manage through these different types of organizations.
Mhm. And the good news, right, the customs and trade structure can evolve with minor tweaks or major if your company and leadership are so inclined.
All right. So what's our FIO for this episode, Jules?
So I think in this one, you should examine your current structure and identify which one you're in, central, decentral, or matrix, and then identify what works well and what needs to change. Like, what gaps are you finding? Because that will help us as we go through the further episodes.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good week. See you next time, Jewel.
All right. Thanks, Renee.